today. So I have been asked to facilitate today's session in his absence. So the purpose of today's session is to kind of focus on this issue of shelter and energy, because I think it's an area where it's a major part of some of our major responses, particularly when we look at winterization or summerization in many countries. But often it goes understated, but there are other experts, working on the issues of energy. The purpose of this call is to kind of see who is on the call and what are you working on in the area of energy. I think Kelly would want me to say a few words, of course, about some recent discussions that we've had in the global shelter cluster recently. So this is in the area of I'm co-chairing the shelter cluster's NFI working group. And we have had several discussions recently, particularly on the role of energy in cooking and in winterization. And so there was a meeting that the Global Shelter Cluster had on that, where several different countries shared what their best practices were, including Venezuela, which is our first shelter cluster to be activated with energy in its title. So certainly it's gaining an increased recognition, but also energy has many, cross-cutting themes as well with many other sectors. So it's kind of cross-cultural. So what we wanted to do today was to kind of open the floor for people to discuss and share, introduce yourselves, and then share what you are working on in energy or any questions that you think the shelter sector should take forward. And I see Kelly was able to join the call. Do you want to take over? Are you able to hear?
No, I'm in the middle of something, so I'll just listen.
Okay. All right. That being said, yes, so we kind of also wanted to get people's asks in terms of what can the shelter sector do more to support energy in the response. I know the Global Shelter Cluster last year, we had commissioned a piece of work that is not yet finished, because it's basically trying to describe what is the role of shelter and energy together. But when we share that with the energy experts, there's a number of important gaps to be done for us to make that case. So it'd be good to hear from the people on the call today. What are their opinions and orientations? I'll stop sharing my screen, but also share important links. But now I want to turn it over to basically the colleagues. We can either go in alphabetical, can share, or to share what are their best energy practices or the key questions that you have for the role of energy in shelter responses. Anybody want to start? Or do we just want to get started with a round of introductions, maybe for the people on this call?
Hi, this is Kelly. I'm calling from Tajikistan.
There's a question in the chat from Ella. Thank you very much. So yes, in terms of the plans for the NFI working group, well, basically what the NFI working group is doing currently is that we have been meeting regularly on different topics that are part of a curriculum. Because the ask from the partners is to develop trainings on NFI responses or basic checklists. So basically in earlier this year, before the pandemic started, we had done a survey with the participants in the call, and they had said that there's a number of critical areas of NFI work where we could do better. So basically, you can find the summary of the survey here on our website. It's one of the featured responses. And basically, people chose different topics that they wanted to see in that training. And then we've been having regular meetings where people are kind of sharing from country level clusters what are their best practices and what are the lessons learned from that training. So of course, in August, we met on the theme of winterization, energy, and cooking. That was with different case studies from Ukraine, Syria, Iraq, and Venezuela. So that was very interesting to see the different work that was going there. And I think one of the takeaways on energy from that session was that energy has a lot of benefits to completing the overall shelter response, but also in terms of choosing what's the best methodology for that response. It can also do harm to the environment, and then the more environmentally friendly options are often more expensive. And then recently we had a meeting as part of the Global Shelter Cluster meeting on approaches for NFI distribution, so focusing on the role of market assessments, etc. And then, unfortunately, both co-chairs of the NFI working group will be out of office for the month, for the next month, but we hope to reconvene, if not in December, then earlier in the new year. I'm seeing other, does that answer your question, Ella? Or do you have more specific questions or insights?
No, I just meant it as to break the ice so that people could kind of think about what they were going to say. Thank you for that.
Yes, and I see Amelia is posting. Do you want to share? You've shared some very interesting links into the chat. Do you want to say some more?
Yes, so hi everyone, my name is Emilia Warsam. I work in the UNEP OCHA Joint Environment Unit, working specifically on mainstreaming of environment in humanitarian projects and programs. To this end, we're really working a lot on policy and different tools. So I just posted two links there, one on our energy page and the other on the shelter page. We do have a couple of interesting things that might be related to the work on energy. Generally, though, I would say that when it comes to energy, we are working closely with the Global Plan of Action on Energy in Displacement Settings. So that's the GPA and the Secretariat. So that would be Amy and Thomas. So we leave kind of everything energy related to them because there's so many actors working in that space, and we focus more on environment. But environment, of course, also links to energy. Just a couple of things. We are planning to make some updates to this EHA Connect site to make it a little bit more interactive, and we're planning also in that respect. We'd be happy to liaise with the shelter ECOP, Environment Community of Practice, to see how we can provide some more targeted guidance. It's a project supported by UNEP, looking at providing operational guidance to clusters, and we're working already with the WASH and food security cluster. The reason we did not start off with the shelter cluster is, again, that we feel that there is already quite a lot of work ongoing. So that might be interesting for you. Otherwise, the other thing that's coming up is we're currently, as OCHA, working on a tasking that was received from the UN Executive Committee, noting that there is need for guidance on environmental mainstreaming in humanitarian settings. So it's going to be raised now at the Operational Policy and Advice, what's it, OPAG, Operational Policy and Advocacy Group, Advisory Group, something like that, sorry, of the ISC. And potentially there will be like a small informal task team looking at available guidance on environment and energy in humanitarian settings. So for those of you that are part of the ISC and interested in that, I hope that's a process that will start shortly, and you guys can be in touch with me for more information on that and anything, in fact, related to environmental mainstream. There's a lot of things going on. We're also working on an urban version of this Nexus environmental assessment tool together with UNHCR. just some comments there. Thanks.
Great, thanks so much. Any questions on that? Yes, Ella.
Yes, thank you, Emilia. I just have a question on what you just said. You're going to work on an urban version of which tool? Neat?
That's a neat tool. I'm gonna put it into the chat as well, the link.
Yes, okay. Thank you, that would be great.
Tool.
Because as at IFRC, we're also working on urban assessments and also together with the Climate Center. So maybe there is a possibility to help each other out or align at least.
Absolutely. So we're in touch here. We have the Swedish Red Cross is on the working group of this urban need. It's Caroline that we're in touch with. But yeah, please reach out to me and we can see, because we'd be again, it's a tool where it's a rapid environmental assessment tool that flags certain issues, and we want to avoid duplication by all means. So whenever there is another tool that's better placed to answer certain questions, we rather than duplicate that, we just flag it that now is the time to do climate risk assessment using that tool, for example. So that would be good. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks so much. That looks like some interesting applications that could have in a number of responses. Is there anybody else who wants to share an update on something that you're working on? And maybe if you're not working on anything, don't worry. You all came to this meeting, I think, because you're interested in shelter and energy. So also maybe share your advice for the shelter sector and where you see energy, fitting into that. So don't be shy on. Maybe you just have some thoughts, some suggestions, etc. Hello, Nurula. Do you want to share maybe you can share out loud what you're posting in the chat?
Hello everyone, this is Nurullah Kuchai from University of Bath. I'm a PhD student and my research is part of a bigger project called Healthy Housing for the Displaced. I was a co-author for one of the research papers recently, and we went to Djibouti. We were working in Merkazi refugee camp. We investigated the indoor air quality in shelters there. Refugees in Merkazi camp, they use fuel to cook, and it's really affecting their health. So they get electricity only for 4 hours during the day and 4 hours during the night. And the weather is very hot there, so that is when they cook. So when they cook on these kerosene stoves, they close the doors and windows and the air conditioner is on. So almost everyone in that camp had the problem of breathing problem, and also they had itchy eyes. So in every shelter you visit, they ask you for medicine, and it's just because of that air conditions and because of the kerosene cooking. I have put the link of the paper in the chat, so you can read further, or you can contact us if you needed any kind of more information on that. Yeah, so again, somehow linked to energy and shelters. Thank you.
Thanks, Nurullah. Maybe you could say, that's a very interesting application. Maybe you could say a bit, have you guys thought any more about how that directly applies to our specific shelter responses during this time of COVID? Of course, when the types of shelters we have to provide should try to mitigate the risks. Has your team thought anything about that?
Yes, so you could, the findings of the work is very clearly written in the paper, but I could highlight that airflow plays a very important role. The main pollutant source were dust, solid fuels, and all the incense, the Arabic incense that they use, and the kerosene spray. some of the families, they spray kerosene on the floor to avoid insects. All of these problems could somehow be solved if we have better airflow and better ventilation in place. So the design of shelter could play a significant role there.
Great, thank you. And then also just a note, Antonella is writing in the chat that she would like to maybe get in touch with you. Antonella, do you want to ask anything specific before we move on to? Okay, nothing specific. Joseph, do you want to talk a little bit about shelter projects and the different case studies?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's self-evident. I guess most people know about shelter projects, but I just did a search and came up with 71 mentions of the term energy. That doesn't mean the case studies are all about it, but I think if people wanted to find more, it's a pretty good starting place to look at what's already documented in terms of projects which have a energy component and what they are. I think a lot are probably in passing, and a lot of them aren't written with energy as the primary focus, but it's clearly a recurring theme in shelter programming. And there's still time, I guess, if people have really interesting case studies about energy provision within shelter programming to include them in the next edition, if you have a good case study.
Great, thanks so much. Any reactions to shelter projects, or maybe do we have any cluster coordinators on the call? Oh, Antonella has her hand up. Let me pass over the floor to Antonella.
No, sorry, I'm just waiting for. Actually, I was reacting to the previous question, so not so much on shelter project at the moment. Just to follow up on my message on the chat, it's about defining a testing ratio, or finding the optimal testing ratio for ventilation within tents, based on also a sort of a mapping of the type of materials that are used to build the shelters itself, aside from the space. So I just wanted to raise this issue to be able to follow up the conversation later on. So that's all. Unless there is already knowledge about testing protocols that can be applied to different size and shapes of shelters, because we are trying to define one at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Antonella. Any reactions from participants, or maybe Nurullah? Maybe you could answer from your experience, or anybody else?
I think it's for a longer kind of.
Yeah, okay, longer conversation. Okay, great. I was on mute, sorry. Question from Kelly is, what do participants think that the shelter cluster should focus on in terms of energy? Are there any respondents to that? Any perspectives? Obviously, you don't have to be like an expert on this issue. It's just maybe from your own reflections. Cooking stoves. Alexander, do you want to say more about your specific input?
Hi there. Yeah, so Alex with NRC in Bangladesh. We are doing an energy component. Well, we're piloting it at the moment, but it's mainly focused on solar energy. So I'd be interested to know if anyone else has got a solar energy component in any project or program that they have. But just from my experience, cooking stoves is probably the most universal energy issue that should be addressed, not just in terms of health, but also in terms of environmental impact.
Xavier, you want to respond?
Yes. Do you hear me? It's okay.
All good.
Okay. So yeah, I'm thinking as a if I put my shoes as a cluster coordinator, we always produce technical guidelines. I mean, at least for IFRC, there's always a willingness to have technical guidelines and to include in it whatever is relevant for the context, to be the most important repository of all technical issues that partners and any stakeholders should be aware, and would be somehow vetted or would be seen as a key backbone for information of the partners. So to respond to Kelly requests, and as we already discussed of ventilation, I think ventilation is interesting topic to develop key guidance, who could be going through IEC, going through guidance on what we mean by ventilation and what are the simple, cost-effective measure that we could put in place. I'm pretty sure that a lot of information is already existing. There is Joe on the call. Maybe there is some IEC material gather who are already addressing this. But I think simple guidance on explaining what we mean by ventilation, what is important, how it's linking shelter and else might be really useful. And when I say that, if I take an example of the past years, the Global Shelter Cluster has developed the guidance on what you could do with the tarpaulin, the use, reuse, recycling, and so on. I think some kind of this global thing might be useful. If you take the first one on tarpaulin, it has been used, for example, in Vanuatu and translated in Lankan languages, and I think that ventilation is a key one. And it's already exactly in line with the current collective willingness to link shelter and health, to see how both sectors could contribute to each other. So yes, I would say, to respond to Kelly, simple guidance on ventilation might be a really good start. Over.
Thank you. And Alexander, just to respond to your questions in terms of cooking stoves, I think there are a few work that's been done. I think for a lot of the context in Africa, it kind of falls in between food security cluster and shelter cluster. But in terms of solar energy specifically, I think the Venezuela cluster had done a bit of work on that. And they had tested with a biodegrader, but of course that's a very expensive solution. So some of this was covered in the NFI working group meeting that we had earlier in August. So you might see some resources there. Unfortunately, the timing of this meeting is a bit early for the colleagues in Venezuela to join, but certainly if you're interested, I could put you in touch later. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Tanya has written sustainability of different solutions. Tanya, do you want to say more about your specific recommendations for the shelter cluster?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. It's just like we are seeing different approaches, from biodigesters to LPG to solar panels, fuel, compressed rice husk, all these things. So it would be very interesting to know, like, what is more sustainable in different environments. Also have some, knowledge also in terms of the toxicity of different fuels. So I think that would be very useful also for further planning of what we do in different responses. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, there's definitely a need for contextualization in terms of different settlement scenarios, different countries, different cultural patterns. I think a lot of those are common issues. Joseph has posted a link in the chat. Joseph, if you want to pose your question out loud to give a bit more context to it.
Sorry. It was just like years ago, like 15 years ago, we were talking about stoves and fuel efficiency, and a lot of the stuff we were doing got taken over by this. I'm not sure what happened to it. So I've not heard it doing much recently. The articles there go back to stop at 2019. I don't know if this group is still active or what happened to the work it was doing.
So hi, this is Emilia. I can answer that question, although maybe there's people who are involved who are better placed. But the SAFE group is still very much alive. They had some issues there, and they were transferring the leadership of the group. But it's very much alive, and they had a meeting last Wednesday. They have monthly meetings, I think. However, they are also discussing at the moment with this global plan of action on energy how to distribute the work between the two coordination groups. But SAFE would typically focus more on field. So I think actually it's a busy space, this energy space, and I think a lot of the things that you are raising are very good, and it makes sense then to reach out to SAFE and GPA to see how you can coordinate with them. Over.
Great, thank you. Marina, do you want to share your thoughts out loud about HLP and cooking fuel?
Hi, Arl. Yeah, it's mainly just what I wrote. Maybe it exists already, a joint work with the protection cluster and houseland property working group, but I see very much the connection. Maybe is livelihoods, shelter, but also protection issue, all this cooking fuel issue, especially I think about African context, it's true especially, but overall, I think it applies. I don't know if it's something going on in that side. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think that's actually, I mean, more and more we see shelter clusters, particularly in Africa, and then also even in Syria. We've done a lot on the issue of settlement planning, particularly, and then how you plan your plot size ratio, which was also why that was recommended as a key indicator in SPHERE in the last revision, because I think that becomes more and more of a key issue. So I think that's important even to recommend contextually. Emilia, do you want to say some comments? Or that was an old hand.
Sorry, it was a new hand. I messed up my unmuting. In fact, we are on protection. We're planning a study together with the London School of Economics on protection and environment energy links. We're just phrasing kind of the terms of reference and the scope of that study, but anyone who is interested to be involved in that, please reach out to me, because we'd be very, very keen. It's going to be kind of a scoping research to find a little bit more, what guidance exists and what case studies and how can we work better on this. So it's kind of a very, very initial study, but anyway, happy to work together on that. I'll post it in the chat as well. Thanks.
Great, thanks so much. Are there any other contributions? I know for me, this is very useful to see all the different thoughts and then ongoing initiatives that we could link better to as a shelter cluster. Any other recommendations for the shelter cluster, with whom to connect, or things that you're working on that you want to promote and get other feedback on? Maybe people who've joined from countries, specific responses. Okay, if not, I'm going to ask everybody in closing, and as I said, we'll make this available on the website, is to fill out your feedback to this session. So these are a series of open sessions that we're having, so they're much shorter than the previous 1-hour session, so I think we are within the time. So please fill out your feedback to the form. And then in terms of today's meetings, we'll put a recap of the different resources and the different chats that were shared available on the Global Shelter Cluster website. And then, of course, You can get in touch with Amelia or Nurullah on any specific questions on the chats that they shared. And then also please get in touch with me if you want to be in touch with any of the countries that presented in the NFI working group. I'd be more than happy to facilitate that for you. So thank you very much for attending, and wishing you all a pleasant day and a good remainder of the week.
Thank you, Renee.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Hani bir savaş olmuş. Bu konu